Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It's great to see you back here. I'm Claudia Rizzini, the Executive Director of the Fellowship Program here at the Radcliffe Institute. I'm happy to introduce Reginald Dwayne Betts, a Radcliffe Fellow from the class of 2012, who will welcome our next speaker, Tracy K. Smith. Dwayne is a poet and a lawyer, a 2021 MacArthur Fellow, and the Executive Director of Freedom Reads, an organization transforming access to literature in prisons through the installation of freedom libraries in prisons across the country. He is also currently a visiting lecturer in English at Harvard and has kindly recorded the following introduction. Let's take a listen.
I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. I was a young writer. I wasn't yet 30 years old. I published my memoir, A Question of Freedom. I published a collection of poetry, Shahid Reed's own poem. And yet I couldn't get a job. I had a young son, young marriage, and I was making next to nothing. And on a Hail Mary, I applied to the Radcliffe Fellowship, and I got it. And it was central, truly and fundamentally, and me changing so much of my life. The book that I was working on became Bastards of the Reagan Era. The first time that I was reviewed in the New York Times. I decided to go to law school. But more importantly, I had moments that mattered that I still remember, like the conversation with the mathematician that led me to read the book on automatons. What I mean to say is the Radcliffe, my time there was important because I developed as an artist, as a thinker, as a writer, but more importantly, I began to recognize the ways in which community is always interdisciplinary. I mean, my days are still filled with some of the remnants of those conversations. And my colleagues who I met there have become friends, are still peers, are still people I look towards, people whose work I look towards. And so I'm honored actually to be back. I'm honored to say that my relationship with Harvard that began with Radcliffe has extended. And I'm now fortunate to be pinch hitting for the great, the lovely Professor Tracy K. Smith. I'm teaching a couple of poetry workshops and I call it a random acts of poetry. And I call it random acts of poetry because I think that we can take the time to bring poetry into people's lives in the most unexpected of ways. Professor Tracy K. Smith has made a living out of doing that. You gotta understand, I first know about Professor Smith because we go back. See, she won the awards that I wanted to win as a young writer. She won one of the first Carly Condon prizes. And you all know what it means to be a black writer in this country. It means that you're always grappling with the history that becomes the subtext of your every breath in your lived reality. And she has done it better than most writers writing in the English language. There's evidence not just by the way her early work, The Body's Question, still stands up, or how Duende is messed up, but I hate Duende and I think Tracy K. Smith. I think Lorca too, but the thing is that she has made Duende something that belongs to the contemporary moment by making Lorca a part of a contemporary moment. And Life on Mars. See, as a black writer in America, unfortunately, we still sometimes obsess over the public recognition. But also, as somebody that's obsessed with skill, that's obsessed with craft, I obsess over when somebody who deserves the public recognition gets it. And so I know the names of every black writer who has won a Pulitzer Prize. And I'm happy to say that I remember at the 10th anniversary of Carly Condon, when all of us gathered and had dinner, when we were all young, not knowing if our next book would even come out. I remember Tracy K. Smith being there. She was already a star amongst us, I get it. But she was there with us. And she is there with us still, champion our work, champion what we want to bring to the world. And so today, we shall champion her work. We shall listen to her sing to us. I am pleased and honored to welcome Professor Tracy K. Smith coming to the stage.
Thank you so much. What a gift and a blessing to be introduced by Reginald Dwayne Betts, who is, I think, an architect of a new and necessary reality, bringing libraries into prisons, working to get people released from unjust sentencing, and building upon the canon of work in the English language with his amazing poetry. So thank you for asking him to do that. I'll watch that again at some point. But what I'm really here to say is how wonderful it is to be a part of the Radcliffe community. And I got to spend a little time talking with Susan S. and Kenneth L. Wallach this morning, who I guess I don't know how the word namesake would work in this sentence, but I hold one of the Wallach professorships at Radcliffe. And this year it means I have time to listen to colleagues and peers who speak different vocabularies, and then to go up to my office and see what that allows to germinate. And so far I'm feeling great hope. So Dwayne talking about the ways that writers invite one another makes me feel like I will read a new poem that I wrote for a writer who I adore, who I had the privilege of working with here at Harvard, and whose work invited me to imagine that I might too claim a voice, and that's the great Jamaica Kincaid. Her work has meant so much to me over the years, and this is a poem about me and about a path that I claim by way of a voice like hers. And it's called Daughter. There was a yard, but not a garden. And so all of it, the kitchen sill, and later an island of shelves, and a table by a chair and a nook where a lamp also sat, and a hook in the ceiling from which hung a spidering fern, all of it became the garden. A pot on a stoop into which were dropped seeds for wish and bliss, seeds the size of nits pushed into a perimeter of dirt that, months later, came up fuchsia against a dun-colored wall. Seeds the shape and weight of pepper flakes my father spread one afternoon onto newspapers in the garage, burning his hands, which in turn scorched his face and eyes. In pursuit of the flame-shaped fruit, he'd dice and sauce and sprinkle onto greens his garden didn't grow. Snails built their gardens, or cities, at the feet of our climbing ivy. We ate them one autumn out of curiosity, our right we were given to believe. Gone now, the peaches, apricots, and figs, whose leaves masked the ceaseless wheeze of cars and trucks on their way elsewhere every day. Gone, too, my mother's roses, simple, red. I'd snip them, then wrap in paper towels, crimped in aluminum foil, on the way to school, for teachers who seemed to believe that I was a garden for something too. Soon, my teachers were books, their authors remote, and for long seasons immaterial, like wisps of scent on the breezes of childhood, which reach everywhere and never cease, do they? Wind of love, of grief, of rage, of laughter. Is it true that everyone is some garden's daughter? I think I'll read one more poem that kind of goes back. This one a little less distant in memory. I know I've been thinking quite a lot about innocence and also compromise. And in some ways, thinking about those questions helps me to imagine what role I wish to play in our culture or in our, the culture that we make and share, and also helps me understand who I've been. So this is a poem that thinks back to the years when I was first becoming an artist and the young marriage that I was in at that time. And the title comes from the name of a song by Victor Jara called Te recuerdo, Amanda. I remember you, Amanda. I was an artist, the way a hatchling still tapping at the shell is a goose or a duck, rather than the mere chance of one. Sun up, I'd roll from the mattress atop the straw mat where I slept beside the husband who taught me to pronounce huelga and obrador. I dressed for work. He went back to sleep. I believed in the dignity of labor, didn't I? Searching Midtown at noon for a $3 lunch, then back to the desk where I processed purchase orders. But liberty was poetry, distance bridged by a single voice, something to give your life to, I thought. Think. Once, I forgot a Victor Jara CD on a cafe table, which was $9 or $12 I'd have to earn again. When I raced back in to ask, the busboys merely shook their heads. Poverty was a regime. Love's betrayals knocked me flat. I always thought Jara's most famous song was about a protest, violent repercussions coming down upon the working class. I thought Manuel died, not that he ducked out early on a rainy day with the woman he loved. Two people can love the same thing so adamantly, it becomes two different things. When I made it home in the dark, my husband would be painting. He'd be standing there alone by a window, smiling to himself, whistling something. I'll read a couple of not new poems because I loved the way that the conversation about difficult questions and useful questions took shape. And I really do believe that my work as a poet is about finding ways to ask those same questions that are important to me over and over again, and yet to learn different things from them. And one of the questions that I'm really interested in is what it means to live in a body, in a culture, in a nation, what it means to believe that you have an attachment to memory, to history, and even to the future. And so I'll read a couple of poems that help me think through some of those things. One is a poem comprised entirely of questions called The United States Welcomes You. And it was written during a period, there's always a period when I was thinking about the victims of police violence. We've been watching for years together stories of unarmed Black citizens who have fallen prey to police violence. And I started writing a poem about that dynamic, but my poem was stalled because I had too fervent a cherishing for the victim in the poem, the person who was standing there with their arms up. And as a poem often requires me to do, I had to reapproach my approach, and my poem shifted perspectives. I stepped into the voice and perhaps a glimmer of the imagination of somebody who might be holding such a person, in fright, in fear of what might happen if they do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And it scared me to recognize how readily I was able to lend my vocabulary to that perspective, but I think it's because I'm part of our culture, and we've all absorbed some aspects of the American imagination that makes such situations prevalent. Why the United States welcomes you. Why and by whose power were you sent? What do you see that you may wish to steal? Why this dancing? Why do your dark bodies drink up all the light? What are you demanding that we feel? Have you stolen something? Then what is that leaping in your chest? What is the nature of your mission? Do you seek to offer a confession? Have you anything to do with others brought by us to harm? Then why are you afraid? And why do you invade our night? Hands raised, eyes wide, mute as ghosts. Is there something you wish to confess? Is this some enigmatic type of test? What if we fail? How and to whom do we address our appeal? I feel like poetry for me, and I think for many other poets, is a way of creating very inexpensive experiments, thought experiments. And sometimes I do that by reflecting on choices I wish I had made differently. So this is a poem that allows me to revisit a really simple moment of feeling utterly vexed by somebody who was causing me to wait in traffic for them to slowly make their way across the street while I was rushing to get somewhere else. This is called Beatific. I watch him bob across the intersection, squat legs bowed in black sweatpants. I watch him smile at nobody, at our traffic stopped to accommodate his slow going. His arms churn the air. His comic jog carries him nowhere. But it is as if he hears a voice in our idling engines calling him lithe, swift, prince of creation. Every least leaf shivers in the sun while we sit, bothered, late, captive to this thing commanding, wait for this man, wait for him. Thank you. Wow, I'm excited to, thank you. I just want to say I'm excited to move further into my time as a Radcliffe Fellow and to learn more from other people who have passed through this.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for your inspiring and beautiful work. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our program's final session, Radcliffe in the World. Radcliffe is committed to fostering research and creative works that engage with the critical questions that society faces today, and this session reflects that commitment. We'll hear from an esteemed group of speakers with expertise spanning disciplines and professions, and who will deliver brief lightning talks on pressing issues in current public discourse. Because this session is intended to present perspectives on a range of subjects, there will be no Q&A. I'll briefly introduce each of our speakers and the broad theme of their respective talks. I encourage you to read their full biographies, which are linked on the 25th anniversary events page on Radcliffe's website. We'll hear first from award-winning tap dancer and choreographer Ayodele Casel on the topic of creativity. Ayodele was the 2020 Francis B. Cashin Fellow here at Radcliffe, and she kindly recorded her talk for us to share with you today. Next, Nikolas Bowie, the Louis Brandeis Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and the current Shutzer Fellow here at Radcliffe, will speak about justice. Shelly Greenfield will then share her expertise on addiction science and treatment. She is the current Mary Beth and Chris Gordon Fellow here at Radcliffe, the Kristine Trustey Endowed Chair in Psychiatry at McLean Hospital, and Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Next, Rob Verchick will discuss climate change. Rob was a 2024 Francis B. Cashin Fellow at Radcliffe and is the Gauthier St. Martin Eminent Scholar and Chair in Environmental Law at Loyola University, New Orleans. Then, Durba Mitra will speak about gender. Durba is the Richard Wolff Associate Professor in Studies of Women, Gender, and Sexuality at Harvard. She is a past Carol K. Forsheimer Assistant Professor at the Radcliffe Institute, a past fellow, and she previously served as acting director of the Schlesinger Library. We'll next hear from Hector Tobar about borders. Hector is a novelist, journalist, and professor of English and Chicano Latino Studies at the University of California, Irvine. He was also the 2021 Lillian Golay Knaufel Fellow here at Radcliffe. Todd Rogers will then speak about democracy. Todd is Weatherhead Professor of Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School and was the 2020 Lillian Golay Knaufel Fellow at Radcliffe. Then, last but not least, Fernanda Villegas will speak about artificial intelligence. Fernanda is a Sally Starling Seaver Professor here at Radcliffe, where she also was a fellow last academic year. In addition, she is a Gordon McKay Professor of Computer Science at Harvard's John Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and she's an affiliate of Harvard Business School. Thank you to all our distinguished speakers for sharing your expertise and perspectives with us today. Please join me in a round of applause for all of them. And then next, without further ado, Ayodele Casel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ayodele Casel, a tap dancer, choreographer, actor, and writer. Thank you to everyone in attendance today. Thank you, Dean Brown-Nagin and the Radcliffe Institute for this generous invitation to be a part of this special 25th anniversary celebration of Radcliffe. I miss you all. I'm happy to be able to share my thoughts on creativity. As an artist, it is quite literally the way I have spent most of my life. I was a fellow at Radcliffe during the 2019-2020 year. We were in person for a little less than 6 months because of the pandemic, or as many of us creative folks refer to it, the panorama, or the panini, the pandemonium, the Panera, and then my personal favorite, the Ponderosa. I'm sure that we all remember what a life-changing time that was, and humor seems to be one of the ways we managed to cope with it. Another way we activated, we started offering lessons online. Artists started creating films in order to share their work since the stage wasn't an option. Happy hours became Zoom dates, and on and on and on our creativity flowed. In my particular art form of tap dance and in my artistic and life journey, I have recognized a connection in how creativity, and I will add innovation, developed in response to oppressive circumstances and life-altering moments. I think about the American history of tap dance, its origins of being rooted in expression and communication, that culturally we as Black people used the playing of drums not only for social gatherings and for musical and dance expression, but began to use rhythm as a way to organize and to rise in rebellion across plantations in the South. The Stoner Rebellion led to the banning of drums and horns, a law that was written into the 1740 Slave Code of South Carolina. But it is this moment of silencing, of cultural and personal trauma that we credit with being the origins of tap dancing. We began to use our bodies, our hands, our feet as percussion in response to that silencing. And to me, that was an incredible act of resistance and creativity. A sophisticated and innovative art form was born. In our life now, sometimes pressing and oppressing moments, show up like deadlines, problem solving at home, budgeting. I recently turned into a landscape and hardscape artist, which is not what I do at all, in response to ridiculously high quotes from landscape companies. I felt like I had YouTube and then the rest of the internet on my side to figure it out, and so I did it myself. I'm gonna show you a picture so you can see how beautiful it turned out. One of the ways that original artistic expression shows up in my practice is through improvisation. There's something about being responsible for contributing musical and rhythmic ideas on the spot that can be jarring for a lot of people. It was for me when I began that practice over 25 years ago. But improvisation, which I believe is a super creative skill, it asks me to confront my fears and insecurities and to do the thing that sometimes, let me be truthful, very often feels terrifying, which is the willingness to be vulnerable. And yet, for me, there is no other way. I know this. I know the reward on the other side of the fear. It was my experience before I made a practice of it. But in tap dance, there kind of is just no way around it. You just have to dig in. I draw deep inspiration from the masterful pianist Cecil Taylor and his expansive and uncompromising approach to musical expression, the idea that you commit to your practice so that you can invent. That the idea of being able to refine a technique eventually creates a pathway for your own invention if you let it. So that in your moment of creation, you are not in your head trying to manipulate the moment, trying to force something to happen, but allowing your curiosity and what you know innately to guide you. For me, that freedom combined with the specific dance vocabulary of tap makes it possible for me to approach the floor at any given time with a reverence for what has existed before me and the thrill and the potential of the present moment. For me, creativity is an active practice. It can flow and it can also stagnate if it's not tended to. But what it asks me to do is to continue to show up. Creativity is freedom. Creativity is authenticity. Creativity is also thinking about the myriad of ways that your vision can be realized. And creativity is trusting that you have all the tools you need to contribute. It requires confidence and courage, but it does not ask for perfection. It asks for your willingness to be taught something, to be open to receiving guidance. One of my great friends and a brilliant choreographer himself, Ronald K. Brown, told me years ago that all I had to experience, to experience a fulfilling creative life was to listen and obey. And in that way, creativity is divine. I find I'm the most creative when I'm not second guessing, when I'm truthfully open to the present moment, when I trust the things that I know and have the humility to understand that there is a whole world of information, a way of approaching things, or that there's just so much more to discover. I'll say it another way. Creativity is using tools we already know and understand to locate tools that we have yet to know and understand. And in that way, I think of creativity as being a window into possibility. What I am continuously reminding myself of is to just keep showing up with courage, curiosity, playfulness, integrity, excitement, and most of all, the authenticity. These are the qualities that have fueled my creativity and keep me engaged in the work year after year. They push me past my comfort zone and into new and exciting territory, sometimes kicking and screaming. And I hope that my creative expression will inspire others to go on the same journey. One final thing I will share is the life-changing support that I received during my creative time at Radcliffe continues to show itself today. So in February of 2020, I delivered my lecture at the Knaufel Center, and I shared a bit of the work I'd been writing. There were ART staff members in attendance right across the street, and I am thrilled to share that this December, my Radcliffe Institute project, Diary of a Tap Dancer, will have its premiere at the American Repertory Theater. So thank you, Radcliffe. Thank you all. And now I am pleased to invite Nikolas Bowie to speak next. Thank you.
In January 1861, Representative Thomas Corwin of Ohio proposed a 13th Amendment to the Constitution. South Carolina had recently seceded from the Union, and Corwin wanted to persuade other southern states not to follow. The amendment read, in full, "No amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that of persons held to labor or service by the laws of said state." In other words, no future amendment to the Constitution could permit Congress to interfere with slavery. By March 1861, both houses of Congress passed the amendment. In his inaugural address, the new president, Abraham Lincoln, endorsed it. States like Ohio and Kentucky soon ratified the amendment. The only thing that prevented it from becoming part of the Constitution was the North's victory in the Civil War. It isn't difficult to imagine our Constitution today with the Corwin Amendment part of it, an amendment permanently prohibiting Congress not only from interfering with slavery, but also from regulating other domestic institutions like child labor, minimum wages, and employment discrimination. Consider what you would do if you were born in this country where such a provision could not be amended away. Would you consider it just to comply with such a provision if it were part of our Constitution? I think not, for a few reasons. First, I would object to the provision's content. Slavery is wrong. A rule that protects slavery would also be wrong. Second, I would object that I had no say in making this sort of provision. I don't mean that just in the sense that the provision was drafted and voted upon entirely by white men in 1861. I also mean that all of those white men are dead. They died decades before any of us were born. Who are they to tell us whether we are allowed to have a Civil Rights Act or Title IX? How just is it to be governed by a group of people whom we can never hold accountable or even talk to? And that raises a final objection. I think the most pernicious aspect of the Corwin Amendment is that it would not only prevent us from abolishing slavery, but also make it impossible for us to amend the provision itself. The framers of the provision were so committed to their own sense of morality that they didn't worry about the profound injustice of binding future generations permanently. These considerations about the injustice of the Corwin Amendment might not seem to matter much because it was not, in fact, ratified. But the reason I bring it up today is because those same three injustices, what it says, who voted on it, and how it can be changed, are applicable to the Constitution we have actually inherited. One reason why Lincoln and others endorsed the Corwin Amendment in 1861 is because they believed the existing Constitution already prohibited Congress from abolishing slavery. The Supreme Court, in a case called Dred Scott, had even declared that the Constitution banned Congress from limiting the spread of slavery to new territories. And that interpretation was not terribly surprising because the original Constitution, like the Corwin Amendment, was written and voted upon exclusively by white men who had long ago died. Only 55 men participated in the drafting of the US Constitution. Half of those 55 men owned slaves, and only about 2,000 additional men in the 13 states voted on their work. The Constitution these men drafted and ratified protected not only slavery, but many other injustices too. It has been invoked to sanction the genocide of Native Americans, the exclusion of Chinese immigrants, the disenfranchisement of women, the internment of US citizens, and a decades-long totalitarian system of racial segregation enforced by violence and voter suppression. The Constitution that we have is also one of the most difficult to amend national constitutions in the world. Like the Corwin Amendment, some provisions of the Constitution explicitly prohibit us, our own generation, from amending things like the Senate's violation of the principle of one person, one vote. The rest of the Constitution can be amended only if a supermajority in the House, a supermajority in the Senate, and supermajorities in the state houses and state senates of 38 states all agree on the change. No other country has anything like this. And to me, this entrenchment is profoundly unjust. Now, many people over the years have recognized the injustice of making laws nearly impossible to amend or get rid of. Thomas Jefferson complained early on that a perpetual constitution would make the earth belong to the tyranny of the dead. He believed all constitutions should expire after not 25 years, but 19 years, so that every generation would have the same right as his to decide whether they liked the existing system or whether they had suggestions for improvement. It took some time, but Abraham Lincoln's generation recognized this too. Despite beginning the Civil War by endorsing the Corwin Amendment, they spent the war reinterpreting the Constitution as something whose words could be updated through democratic politics. Even before proposing new constitutional amendments, Lincoln signed ordinary laws passed by Congress that began to abolish slavery and reconstruct the Union into a multiracial democracy. The Reconstruction Congress rejected the Supreme Court's calcified invocation of history and tradition. Instead, they used statutes to expand the Constitution into the basis for a government of the people. I think their experience offers an important lesson for our generation today. As just as you might think a constitution or amendment might be, it is unjust to bind generations after you without allowing them to decide for themselves what laws they want. Unless our fundamental laws are as easy to amend as our ordinary statutes, we will be shackled by the values of the past. So rather than allow ourselves to be ruled by the hands of the dead, or even by the hands of robed lawyers who claim special powers to commune with their original understanding, justice demands that our elected leaders take ownership of the Constitution on behalf of we, the living people. It is now my pleasure to invite my fellow Radcliffe Fellow, Shelly Greenfield, to the stage.
I am delighted to be here with you today. I am going to talk with you about substance use disorders, which are an urgent problem in healthcare and public health in the United States. I'm going to focus most specifically on how the healthcare crisis affects women and girls across the age span, which is also the focus of my research this year as a Harvard Radcliffe Institute Fellow. But first, I'd like to set the context, set this in the broader context of substance use problems in healthcare in the United States. So we know that the rates of alcohol and drug use have increased in the United States across the entire population, with rising rates of substance use disorders across these substances, resulting in multiple medical, psychiatric, and social consequences. We have effective treatments for substance use disorders, yet only 10% of patients with a substance use disorder will receive treatment in any given year in the United States. Why is this treatment gap so large? Well, there has been long-standing underfunding of treatment in the United States, which is a chronic problem we've experienced decade over decade. So why is this, I ask you, and I would posit that stigma plays a large role, as these conditions are highly stigmatized, as are the patients who have them. I believe this has resulted in discrimination with a resulting lack of resources and infrastructure that has made us woefully unprepared for the increased need we've experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. It's resulted, in my opinion, among the greatest treatment disparities in the United States, affecting all ages, races, ethnicities, and genders. And we have very specific concerns for the women across the entire age span, including adolescent girls. So in 2020, 15.4% of the US population over the age of 18 had a substance use disorder. And yet, Despite the consequences, the disease burden, treatment gaps remain absolutely vast, with 90% of all people receiving absolutely no treatment in the previous year for their substance use disorder. So in this context, why are we especially concerned about women and girls? Well, we know that they now initiate their substances at an earlier age than in previous generations and at the same age as their male counterparts. They actually advance more rapidly from first use to first regular use to first problem use to first treatment episode, and this can happen at smaller quantities of substances used for fewer years. They average more medical, psychiatric, and social consequences, and this phenomenon has a term. It's called the telescoping course of substance use disorders in women, an accelerated course. In 2021, males were still more likely to have a substance use disorder than were women, but there was a 1.3 to 1 ratio of men to women with a substance use disorder. That's in 2021. In 2001, that ratio was 2.6 to 1, so you see there was a narrowing of this gender gap by half in 20 years. So in this context, with this narrowing gap, we are especially concerned about adolescent girls. So I'm calling your attention to this red triangle. In 2013, for the first time, girls equaled boys in the prevalence of past year substance use disorders. But for the first time in US history in 2019, girls actually exceeded boys in the prevalence of past year substance use disorders between the ages of 12 and 17. This is true across multiple substances. I'm going to show you alcohol in particular. In this figure, the red lines are girls, the blue lines are boys, and for alcohol, you can see here that among 12 to 17-year-olds in this circle, females exceeded males in past month drinking in 2012 and past month binge drinking in 2016. And while there's been an overall downward trend, which is good in this age group, you can see here in 2022 that girls exceeded boys in both drinking and binge drinking. All of this is also true across the entire age span. In the decade between 2001 and 2012, there was a 58% increase in women's high-risk drinking compared to 16% in men, and an 84% increase in women's one-year prevalence of having a past-year alcohol use disorder versus 35% in men. So why do we worry about all of this? Well, we worry because alcohol-related health risks occur throughout the entire lifespan. They include liver disease, brain health and memory, multiple different kinds of cancers, including breast cancer for women, cardiovascular diseases, and mental health consequences. And I have just told you about this telescoping accelerated course where women experience greater harms at lower doses of alcohol over shorter periods of time. Why are the rates increasing in women? So this obviously is multifactorial, and it is in fact the question of why this is happening and what we might do about it that is the focus of my year here at Radcliffe. But here what I'd like to posit to you is that over the past 15 years, we've seen marketing of alcohol beverages direct to women in traditional and non-traditional media, the so-called commercial determinants of health. Here you have chick beer, little black dress wine, mommy's timeout wine, and Mad Housewife wine, using traditional direct-to-women marketing venues. But in addition, in social media, with the advent of influencers on Instagram and Facebook and other outlets, we have seen the wine moms phenomenon, where women are told that coping with motherhood and having social, recreational activities all require pairing with wine. In this context, it's important to know that there are actually specific treatment barriers for women. They're less likely to be screened in primary mental health care. There's a lack of treatment services for pregnant and parenting women. Economic barriers, trauma histories, social stigma and discrimination are disproportionately experienced by women. And there's a higher risk that women hold for certain psychiatric disorders, such as these pictured here. And that actually sometimes is, in fact, another barrier for their accessing treatment for substance use disorder services. It's imperative that we actually design treatment and prevention that's gender-specific and gender-responsive to women's needs. That idea is actually gaining traction over the last 15 years with multiple innovations that have actually taken place. So now to wrap up. We have rising rates of substance use disorders across these substances. There's a decreasing gender gap with rising rates in the United States in women and girls. We have effective treatments. I cannot emphasize that enough to you. We have effective treatments for substance use disorders, but few individuals are able to receive treatment. The gap's even greater for US women and girls. We actually need to prioritize addressing the gap in need for substance use care and the availability of this care for US adolescents and adults. And this will require political will, along with strategy at state and federal levels to provide the necessary resources. Addressing the specific needs of women and adolescent girls to provide responsive prevention and treatment is going to be critical. With that, I really thank you for your attention, and I'm now pleased to invite Robert Verchick to share his thoughts next.
First of all, if you've read the news this morning, I know that all of our hearts are with the folks in southeastern Florida and north, having been smacked with Hurricane Helene. I want to keep that in mind because I'm going to ask you to use your imagination in a different way in Florida today. I want you to think back to some sunnier times, maybe a few years ago. Imagine you are a real estate agent and your name is Richard Conlon and you live in that beautiful condominium complex right on Biscayne Bay. All right. Now you're just getting up in the morning and you're going down to your car, and your car is in a parking garage, which you can see right there, and it looks over Biscayne Bay. And you're a little groggy and it's still dark outside, and so when you're in the tunnels down there, you don't see anything, but you hear the drops and plopping of water. And then you hear some sloshing and a little slapping against the concrete. And as you look carefully and as your eyes adjust to the green lights down there, this is what you see. An octopus alive the size of a double pizza. All right? Now, I know what you want to know, so I'm going to tell you it was rescued and it was fine. All right. The second thing I know you want to know is how it happened. And of course, I'm the guy who's going to tell you it's because of climate change, right? Nearly so. So let me tell you. So there's a drain pipe that goes down all the way to Biscayne Bay. The sea level's rising. We have some freak tides. And every once in a while, the drain shoots the other way and burps out water and fish and sometimes a cephalopod, all right? And when I saw that, I thought to myself, if we can't keep octopuses out of a parking space, what else can't we do? And you know this is a problem because we're seeing mega storms and super droughts, and we're seeing wildfires everywhere. And you know, I'm going to show you a slide I've shown 3 years in a row. All right, which is that more than half of Americans experienced extreme weather last summer, right? Now, what do we do about something like that? My area is law and policy. And I know what the solutions are, right? And you do too. The one solution is we've got to reduce carbon pollution. And the other solution is we've got to get resilient. We've got to adapt more to climate change to prepare for those dangers that we're not going to be able to avoid. Now, as a lawyer and a law professor, I have spent most of my career working on the climate resilience, and that's because after Hurricane Katrina, I found my house 5 feet underwater, all right? But it's not about me. It's about you too, because scientists and experts tell us that if we don't learn to adapt to climate change, we are going to lose $500 billion every single year. All right? And so one thing that I want to talk about then is a particular kind of climate impact. And that impact is heat. Okay, that's Las Vegas, Nevada. I grew up in Las Vegas. Today, in late September, it's over 100 degrees. All right, that's something I didn't see as a kid. You want to know what else? In Florida, where millions of people don't have power today, the heat index is going to be over 100 degrees. So think about all of the people who are going to be clearing out their yards, all of the people who are going to be tarping their roofs, and all of the people over a span of months who are going to be reframing houses. All right? Now, you might think that the laws in the United States have a lot to say about protecting people against heat waves. Heat waves which kill 7 times more people in the United States than floods or storms or any of that. Heat waves which disproportionately harm people of color, older Americans, and people who are poor. I'm here to tell you that we don't have a lot of protections on that. I learned that, I wrote a book called Octopus in the Parking Garage, which is about climate resilience. And one of the things I did is I went back to my hometown and I met Cynthia Moore, who lives in a community very, very close to where I grew up. And at the time, her boy Liam had allergies, and they were really had a hard time with wildfire smoke that would get trapped in Las Vegas because of heat domes. Now, what she ended up doing was learning a lot just on her own. She was a real estate agent, just like Richard Conlon, and she started talking to people in her neighborhoods about the problems of particulate matter and air pollution and heat. Later on, she got a full-time job running an environmental justice program all throughout the state of Nevada. And then she got involved in politics, because heat became the thing she cared the most about, because there are no worker heat standards in the state of Nevada, or in Arizona, or in New Mexico. In Florida, right, which we are thinking about, it's against the law to have worker protection heat standards. So she got me thinking about what else we can be doing about this. All right, so one thing is I'm looking through OSHA laws, but another thing that I found out is the Stafford Act, which is an act that I teach about. That's the disaster law that puts FEMA people all over the country, and that allows hundreds of millions of dollars to be moved into areas that need it. I'm here to tell you that FEMA doesn't believe that the Stafford Act allows a heat wave to constitute a major disaster under the law. And right now, I've been doing work probably for the last 6 months trying to prove that that's wrong, that there's a legal argument that allows a president, if he or she wants to declare a major disaster for a heat wave. I'm here to say that there are all kinds of portals for addressing these kinds of climate impacts. People often come, talks like this, and they say, well, how do I get involved in climate change, right? Do I have to learn about core samples? Do I have to learn about particulate matter? I mean, if you want to, right? But the other thing you can do is look at things you already care about. Maybe you care about gardening. Maybe you care about fishing. Maybe you care about the kids playing in the parks in your neighborhood when it's too hot outside. Think about anything that you might be able to do to help. You thought I had an answer today, and I don't have any answers, but I got 2 questions. The first thing I want you to do is think about, what is your octopus story? What is climate change doing that's a curveball? And I want you to ask, what will you do about it? And it's my pleasure to invite, I am so sorry. Oh, Durba Mitra to come speak.
I want to say thank you to Dean Brown-Nagin and the Harvard Radcliffe Institute for making this beautiful world of ideas. We may think of the concept of gender as a timeless idea, one that has organized our societies since time immemorial. It may surprise you then that gender is really quite a recent invention. It seems like a natural idea in our world today because the concept appears everywhere, all over, in most domains. We see the term in national census data, in really every kind of paperwork that we do for doctors, for schools, to get our driver's license. Often in government data, international organizations, in social research and political movements, the term gender has been used as a substitute for the category of women. In phrases like gender equality and gender empowerment that actually focus on women and their rights. For researchers like me, gender is about the social dynamics that define changing power structures organized around the social enforcement of the binary of man and woman. But in the recent past, gender has taken a far more insidious turn in the fear-mongering rhetoric of authoritarian states and zealots who condemn gender ideology, as feminist philosopher Judith Butler explains. Gender today, particularly fear about its changeability, is used to stoke anxiety and terror, to foment panic, to control and police the bodies and lives of women and sexual minorities. In other words, policing one's gender has become essential for authoritarian politics in the 21st century. Now, the term gender was first used regularly by medical professionals in the mid-20th century at Johns Hopkins, who sought to assign a singular assignment of sex to children born intersex, as explained by former Radcliffe Institute fellow and historian Jules Gill Peterson. As her research reveals, the concept of gender was created to assign social characteristics that enforced a false biological binary on people who were never binary in the first place. Yet even if the concept of gender is a relatively recent invention, the organization of societies by and through binaries of sexual difference is not. Indeed, the origin of the idea of gender has a much deeper history. As scholars show, the notion that humans have only two binary sexes is false, based in mountains of scientific research and social data that shows that every person experiences a spectrum of gender in their lifetime. The idea that there is only one gender or gender binary is linked to the massive reorganization of most people in the world through systems of enslavement and colonialism. In my first book, Indian Sex Life, Sexuality and the Colonial Origins of Modern Social Thought, which I completed here in this beautiful space as a Radcliffe Fellow from 2018 to 2019, I explore how colonialism and colonial powers used racialized discourses about modern civilization to create gender difference based in the sexual subordination and exploitation of colonized people. Colonial states created systems of law, science, and knowledge that reinforced the gender binary and forced heterosexual marriage on people and criminalized many communities, from women who sought to control their sexuality to queer and gender nonconforming people. The colonial binary of gender became central to the locus of power for modern states. By the 1970s, the term gender came to assume the meaning we ascribe to it today, the many psychological and social dimensions of sex. In my second book, which I began here as a fellow, The Future That Was, I analyze a world of research conducted by women from across geographies from the global South who transform how we understand the term gender through a new politics of international rights and development. I explore how and explain that through years of research and writing, third world women, self-described, and women of color, often Bunting Fellows in the 1980s, contested and critiqued gendered power at a scale never seen before. Women from around the world gathered together at international conferences. They built infrastructures of research on gender in every field, from economics, like we saw yesterday, to public health, to law, to economic policy and politics. Women from the global South, once deemed people without rights, wrote thousands of research studies that exposed the systematic subordination of women and gender minorities in their societies. They appeared on the international stage and changed the very measures we use to study and understand the development and the progress of our world. These global projects challenged gendered power, ideas of war and violence, and built new visions of freedom and liberation for women and LGBTQ people by challenging the term gender itself. Gender is thus foundational to power today. The forced policing and violent enforcement of gender as solely a biological binary between man and woman is a profound threat to the very heart of democracy and the right to bodily autonomy, self-determination, and full citizenship. If you have one takeaway from my brief reflection on the category of gender today, it is this. Gender is not a pre-existing thing in the world, in my body, a fact, a box to be checked on a form, a natural essence, a reductive idea of the biological difference between man and woman. Rather, gender is a site of imagination, of political contestation, of defiance. It is a concept in flux, one constantly being reimagined. Rethinking the gender binary, experimenting with the limits of gender, transgressing the bounds of the enforcement of binary gender, and exposing the way gender is wielded for anti-democratic politics, that is how we, today, make possible survival for the future. Or, in the words of the extraordinary poet Lucille Clifton, won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. What did I see to be except myself? Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. Now I welcome Hector Tovar to the podium.
Thank you to Radcliffe for the support of my work over the years, and thank you for the honor of inviting me to speak here today. This you see here is the demographic pie of the United States that you see most often in the media, and which corresponds to our general idea of the nation's diversity. The numbers are from the census, but there's a kind of statistical sleight of hand in this chart because all the categories listed are races in the census except for Latino, which is an ethnicity. Police use these categories to identify suspects. News outlets use them ad nauseum. Here we see Harvard admissions and mass incarceration described in graphs with these same categories. And again, Latino is made equivalent to a race. This practice has become so common that in the 2030 census, as long as Kamala wins, Latino will be reclassified as a race. This doesn't mean that a panel of scientists studied our skin tones, the shapes of our skulls, and decided that we are a race. That didn't happen because we're not living in the 18th century when scientists did those things. In fact, today it's generally agreed that the idea of race has no basis in biology. So, when you say Latino is a race, what you're really saying is that there are these people called Latino who have a relationship to the United States that is racial. Race is an idea that a group of people share certain qualities by birth. Race ideas about Black people were born from the exploitation of slavery. Race ideas about Native people were born from settler colonialism. And race ideas about Latino people are tied to the building of an American empire. This 18th century painting illustrates the caste categories of another empire. It's from colonial Mexico, and it's an artifact of a society attempting to preserve the idea of racial order even as people violate that order by crossing race lines in their intimate relationships. So, for example, a person of mixed ancestry could be called a lobo, which means wolf, or a salta atrás, which means to jump backwards. There's at least one Spanish cast colonial term commonly used in American English today, and that is cholo. Latino people in the United States today have all sorts of names and categories assigned to us. Mixed status is a term used to describe families where some members are documented and others are not. One of the older insults against us, a word I don't have up here, is wetback. The etymology of wetback is in the border itself, the Rio Grande. And then there's the modern anchor baby. My Guatemalan parents crossed the border, and I was born here in the United States, which makes me an anchor baby. So all of these terms are tied in one way or another to a border crossing. The border itself, as both a physical barrier and a legal theory, is an artifact of empire. This obelisk was placed by a commission of US and Mexican surveyors after the US won the War of 1848. The commissioners drew a straight line across the desert where no border existed before, all the way to the Pacific. More than 100 years later, First Lady Pat Nixon came to that spot to dedicate a binational Friendship Park. This is Friendship Park today. The paradox of these border barriers is that they're growing more robust the more dependent the country is on Latino labor and the more intimate the mixing between the so-called races in all 50 states. Back in the year 2000, I traveled to Grand Island, Nebraska to write about the spread of Spanish language radio. I discovered they were building an immigrant detention center in Grand Island as well. The spread of ICE detention facilities and the spread of the legal idea of the border have followed the spread of Latino culture across the United States. Immigrants awaiting deportation hearings are sometimes set free on the condition they wear ICE-monitored ankle bracelets. When they do so, they carry the border with them everywhere they go. The idea of race is that it's something indelible, something about yourself you can't erase. In present-day race thinking, Latino people are defined by the border. From cartel movies to news stories, the border looms over the image of Latino people. In the American imagination, we're like the souls in Dante's Inferno, suffering for the sins of our people, of our ancestors, perpetually trapped in the barren metaphor of a desert purgatory. In race thinking, Latino people are a caste that pampers the privileged. We're hardworking, but not smart. Racist ideas about Latino people are one of the many ways our country erases the nobility of labor, of physical labor especially. This man you see building a fence, he's a Guatemalan immigrant who left his country at the age of 21 with a 6th grade education. But he's also a voracious reader of Roman history. I know this because he's my father. And that fence, by the way, he's building it for me. In truth, Latino identity is a rich and resilient creation of cross-cultural encounters, as rich as, say, the musical and artistic genealogy of Bad Bunny. I'd love to decode and unravel Latino culture for you, but that would require a 7-hour lecture and not a 7-minute one. Thank you. And with that, I will pass the lectern to Todd Rogers.
Hi, I want to just open with this reminds me so much of the experience of being a fellow, which is just incredible, inspiring, and incredibly humbling sets of speakers who precede you. Thank you all. I'm a behavioral scientist here at Harvard. I was also a fellow with Ayodele Casel earlier and with Fran Berman earlier, and it's great to see everyone. I'm going to talk about simplifying government, and I added the word AI today because I thought maybe that would make it more interesting. It was either going to be blockchain or AI. We're actually going to talk about AI. In order for democracy to work, people have to believe the government is able to help them solve problems. Too many Americans don't believe that that is the case. Part of that is because it is complicated and hard to navigate and understand interactions with the government. I'm going to propose two strategies for making it easier for people to navigate and understand government. The first is very old. The second is very new. I like to think of this as moving from complexity to simplicity. While a fellow, I wrapped up a project that started with Vice President Harris when she was the Attorney General in California. We were interested in reducing absenteeism for K-12 students. This letter is a state-mandated letter for any kid who has, that goes to the family of any kid who has missed 3 days or been late 3 days. So in California, they send millions of these. Around the country, they send tens of millions. I'm going to read for fun because I think you guys would enjoy it. This is going to families of kids in the Los Angeles Unified School District who have missed school. The first two lines. California Education Code, Section 48260, provides that a pupil, child, subject to compulsory full-time education or to compulsory continuation education. I could continue. It is not written for humans. It's just written for lawyers. And I know there are lawyers in the room. Lawyers are people too. So the reason we needed the Attorney General involved was because we were going to rewrite it. We're going to rewrite it so that it is easier to read, as if we want to make it easy for people to understand. While a fellow, I began what became a project with my co-author Jessica Lasky-Fink called Writing for Busy Readers, where based on dozens, maybe hundreds of randomized experiments, we study how people read in the wild. It turns out they don't, they skim. And we should study how they skim and write in a way that makes it easy for skimmers if we want to effectively communicate. This is the letter we came up with, and you can see why we needed the AG involved, because we wrote the state-mandated language in really small font, and we wrote in 5th grade reading level. We used formatting to reinforce the purpose. We wrote half as many words, and then we ran a randomized controlled experiment looking at the effect across 131,000 families of one letter versus another versus another. Unsurprisingly, writing for people to make it easy to read made it more effective. This is now the state standard in California. I think Texas is considering it, others similarly. The first really old idea is we should write so it's easy for people to read. It will be more likely it is accessible to people. It will also be more likely that people read it and respond to it. That's the easy one. The new one is inspired by a student, an alum of the Kennedy School named Raj Singh, who works with the Punjab, India state government. And he was explaining to me this summer this incredible project they did. In Punjab, just a couple facts, just one fact that's relevant for right now. Varying levels of literacy, but 3 primary languages, English, Hindi, Urdu. They consolidated all the services that the state government offers into one website. You can imagine all the work, from applying to services, to tracking things you're doing, to getting help with emergencies, to a death in the family, navigating all the relevant bureaucracy. They put it all in one site. And all you had to do was go there, log in, describe your problem, write your problem, and then choose the agency to send it to. There's one laugh. Unsurprisingly, the majority of people sent them to the wrong agency. Because it turns out that there being no power in my building, I don't know that that actually goes to some authority that the word power is not in. And so people send it, so it works its way up, works its way down, and then we tell you, you sent it to the wrong place, start over, please. But they'd centralize all the data to make it easier. It just wasn't easier. So What they ended up doing is they put a thin layer, now that large language models are accessible, a thin layer of artificial intelligence to make it more navigable. And they moved it to WhatsApp. So they create a WhatsApp tool where you can just text a number. And they call them all grievances. I think it has maybe a different cultural meaning. Any interaction with government is a grievance in this setting. So they have a number, they move it to WhatsApp, you can choose your language, it's in a platform they already communicate in, and you can write in plain language. So what's your grievance? There's no light at home. I understand, could you please provide your full name and the district? So Raj enters his full name. Do you know what level this is a problem at? Like, power's out, do you know? He's like, I have no idea. And they're like, okay, our best guess is this. We've sent it through, we'll tell you back on this platform in plain language where it's going. It's a super thin layer. Fernanda after me is going to tell, I assume, a much more complex story about artificial intelligence. This is just making the existing intensive data infrastructure navigable. Making it more navigable will make it easier for people to interact with and more likely to interact, hopefully increasing their trust in government. Those are the two things. The one, people will trust government more when it's easier to interact with and they believe that it can help them solve problems. Part of the way we can do that is by making it less complex and more accessible. One is by simplifying how we write, and the second is providing tools which are increasingly available to help navigate the resources of government that are already being offered, but just very difficult. With that, thank you. Sure. Okay. With that, I'm going to introduce Fernanda Villegas, who is going to be our last lightning round speaker. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'll keep this short. I'm the only thing between you and lunch. I know that. So, okay, let's talk about AI interpretability. Or in other words, what are we learning right now about how these large language models work? And let me get my... Yes, something really exciting happened back in May of this year. Anthropic, one of the biggest companies with some of the best large language models out there, came out with this big discovery. For the first time, they mapped the mind of one of these production systems called Claude. And what they did is they started to show how millions of concepts are represented inside Claude's systems, okay? And how Claude kind of thinks, if you will, about these concepts as it is interacting with us. What does that mean? I'll show you a little bit of a data visualization here. So it turns out that if we look inside the system, we can see groups of neurons that activate very highly when certain topics come up. You know, let's stop thinking about AI for a moment, but you know when scientists study our brain and they do brain scans to understand, oh, different regions of our brain light up when I'm reading or when I'm running, right? Imagine that's the same thing. They're looking inside the system and they're trying to understand what groups of neurons light up, get very activated when, for instance, you talk about Amelia Earhart. So it turns out that there are groups of neurons when you're talking about her that always light up around things like plane crashes or explorers or adventure, right? Or when you're talking about internal conflict conversations, there are groups of neurons inside Claude that are very focused on things like ethical dilemmas or opposing ideas, right? And there's so many more. There are millions of concepts that they could actually identify. And this is exciting because, and let's zoom into a couple of these. So when the conversation is about immunology, there are groups of neurons that care deeply about the common cold and flu. There are groups of neurons that care about cancer immunotherapy. And then there are groups of neurons that activate a lot for HIV and immunodeficiency. Why does this matter? It matters a lot because these systems, as you probably know, are very mathematical, very complex, right? A lot of times we talk about them as black boxes. And to a certain extent, they are so complex that we don't fully know everything that's happening. And it tends to be very mathematical. For the first time, this is one of the signals we have that these systems are forming concepts that kind of reflect concepts that we hold dear as humans. And that means that we can start to understand how these systems work and how they behave. And so this is one of those little keys that let us hopefully get to a point where we can control these systems better. Okay, so this is what Anthropic did. It was huge. Here at Harvard, and what my project was here at Radcliffe, was actually realizing that AI systems aren't just modeling topics around the world like diseases, which obviously is super important, and historical figures. This is all wonderful. It turns out too, and this is what we're exploring, that these systems are modeling you and me. So every time we interact with one of these large language models, every time you talk to one of these, ChatGPT and so forth, it is trying to infer things about you. It is trying to infer your age, your gender, your level of education, your socioeconomic status, and so on, okay? And so these are some of the things we're finding by looking inside of these systems. And what we call this kind of collection of features, right, about us, we're calling this a user model. And to be clear, this may not be a bad thing, because truly, this is what you and I do all day long. We model each other, right? You're looking at me right now and you're like, should I trust her? What level of education does she have? Or maybe I can figure out her age, right? Maybe I know something about her because I've seen people like her before, right? We do this because we have to, because communication is hard, right? So we model each other. And so it's no wonder that these systems maybe are modeling us, right? The thing that gets complicated, though, is the fact that they are also choosing their behavior based on this model of us. And sometimes these models can be either incomplete or incorrect, and then what do? So let me give you one example of something that we found out in our lab. So we found all of these features I'm highlighting here, but I want to highlight socioeconomic status. I want to share with you a little experiment that one of my PhD students did. He found the socioeconomic status feature inside Llama 2. It's an open source model. And he asked the following thing of the system. He asked for a trip to Hawaii. He's like, I live in Boston, I want to spend vacation in Hawaii, can you help me with the itinerary? And the system was like, great choice. Hawaii is a great destination. Of course I can help you. And then the system said, and I highlighted there are plenty of airlines that offer direct or connecting flights from Boston to Hawaii. All good. And because, again, my student has access to the inner workings of the system, the student could see that the model was kind of inferring that the student was middle socioeconomic status, okay? No intervention. But again, because we found this series of neurons, the next thing the student did was to pull them towards low socioeconomic status. So again, this is the model's perception of my student. Then the student asked exactly the same thing. I live in Boston, I want to spend vacation in Hawaii, can you help me? The model again is like, yes, of course, that's a great idea. And then said, unfortunately, there are no direct flights from Boston to Hawaii. So therein lies our conundrum, right? The model is modeling us in all sorts of different dimensions. And in a sense, that's an efficient thing to do, because that's how we also work. But it gets problematic when the model is literally lying to me based on its inference of me, right? A few minutes ago, the model had said there are direct and indirect flights from Boston to Hawaii, and now it's saying, oh, there are no direct flights. Well, that's a problem. So what do we do then? So one of the things that we think is really important is that finally now we're getting to a point where we know enough of these systems. There is enough beginnings of transparency that the hope is we can bring that transparency to end users in a simple enough way. Thanks, Todd, for that. It has to be simple so that users have some agency around what is happening inside these systems. So what we did was we created a dashboard that actually users can use. So on the right here is just your regular chat. You're chatting with the bot. But on the left, we have actually really the features that we found inside the system. And then as you are doing your chatting, the system, the dashboard is actually showing you what it thinks of you. Oh, okay, so I think right now this person seems like a teenager. This person seems to have, middle-class socioeconomic status, high school education, and 77% confidence that it's a female. Okay? The conversation there was about music, and the user was asking for music recommendations. And this happens all the time. And so we ran a user study, an initial user study of this, where we literally had people who were not computer scientists come and play with this. And it was very interesting. One thing that we found out is that end users were very, they were able to surface model biases. So things that scientists are trying to find, these end users were finding. They were playing with what-if scenarios. Remember I said once you find one of these features, you can control them. So we had users who were female, having their little chat with the chatbot, asking for help with the trip, and say, oh, these are good recommendations for my trip, but what if I were male? Would the recommendations change? And they did, right? And so you have this quick ability to play and to steer the model in different ways. And that gives you user control, it gives you agency. So this is just the beginning of a project. There are many other features, there are many more sophisticated and complex things that are happening inside these systems that we're hoping we can start to surface and actually make way more transparent for us, for policymakers, for the companies who are building these systems themselves. We think this is really important. And the last plug is that you can play with a live demo of this during lunch. It's going to be available at FAE. And with that, thank you so much. Let's go to lunch. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing set of talks, so thought-provoking, powerful, brilliant speakers. Please join me in another round of applause for all of them. So this concludes our morning program. I invite our in-person audience to join us for a community reception and lunch with students from across the university who've participated in Radcliffe's unique research, mentoring, and service opportunities. Bagged lunches are available outside under the tent, and you're welcome to join us next door in FAE House to chat with the students and enjoy dessert and beverages. I am so proud of the Institute's investment in our student community, and I encourage you to spend some time hearing from them about their Radcliffe experiences. If you haven't done so already, I hope you'll visit our Radcliffe Moments installation in our yard. And I'll conclude by saying this has been an amazing 25 years. They've been remarkable, and I'm so excited for what we can achieve together in our next quarter century. Thank you to everyone for helping us celebrate our 25th anniversary and for being a part of the Radcliffe community. Have a wonderful afternoon.